Okay. So now to the sum of finite arithmetic sequence. So S sub n is the sum of a certain number of terms. This is where it gets a little weird sometimes for some problems. So S sub n is basically the sum of a certain number of terms. So whatever this number here is, goes here. But it's not necessarily the same here. In your book, it's probably only going to give you things that are going to work out nicely. But I'm going to do one on here where they're not. So A sub n, what you need to concentrate on is that A sub 1 means your first term. But keep in mind, if I'm doing a sum, you might be starting on the third term or the fifth term or the sixth term or the seventh term. So when it says A sub 1, it means the first term in the sequence that you have. So when they have A sub n, that means the last term. So sometimes, just because of the way this book does it, this number here is not necessarily going to be the same as this on this problem, and I'll show you why. That's why sometimes if you do NFL, it's a little bit easier. So the sum of your first terms is the number of terms. So n is your number of terms. F is your first term in the sequence. L is your last term. So if you think NFL over 2, it's going to go a lot easier when you get to a few of the problems. I want to find the sum, show your work using the sum of the finite arithmetic sequence formula. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 terms. So I want to find the sum of 7 terms. So that equals 7. So that's the n, parentheses, n, f, l, over 2. So that's going to give me 3.5. 7 divided by 2 is 3.5 times 62, which ends up giving me a total of 217. And yes, I understand this is small enough that you probably could have just added these. But if you're on a non-calculator part of your test, you're not going to want to add all these up. Or if I give you 200 numbers, you're not going to want to add them up. So the whole point to the summation formula is you can do this. I can obviously do this without a calculator. This would take you longer, and you're probably going to mess up your addition. So this is a little bit neater and faster. Okay, I want to find the sum from 1 to 100. So if I count 1 to 100, that means there's 100 terms. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. So that's your number of terms. Okay, if I want to find my first term, I need to plug in whatever number is down here. It's not always going to be 1. Sometimes it's going to be 0. Sometimes it might start with a 3 or a 4 or 5 or anything like that. You need to plug that in. So 3 minus 1 gives me 2. That's my first term. Then my last term, that's my L, is the 100 goes in here. So 3 times 100 minus 1, 300 minus 1 is 299. So then I can stick it in my sum of 100 terms is n, f, l. So my number of terms is 100. My first term is 2. Last term is 299 over 2. And that ends up with 15,050. Okay. This next one, you need to be a little careful. You're starting at 0 this time to 100. So if I do 0 to 100, that actually is 101 numbers. Not 100. You have to be careful. Just because there's 100 up here, you can't just do 100 divided or 100 minus 0. It's basically the top minus the bottom plus 1. So then my first term, you plug in the 0. 1/2 of 0 plus 3 is 3. My last term, half of 100 plus 3 is 53. So then when I plug it in, sum of 101 numbers is my number of terms, n, f, l over 2. And when you do that, that's 28, 28. So you have to be careful for that. So normally if you wrote it out, a sub n equals your n times a sub 1 plus a sub n over 2, it looks like this number should be the same as this one, should be the same as this one. But you have to be careful with the notation in this book. They should have used other letters other than n, which is why our old book used to use I. So keep in mind that this n is your number of terms. These two are the same. Ignore the fact that this is a sub n. A sub n is just a notation to tell you last term. And your last term you get by plugging in 100, not 101. Oh, let's move this. 12. So on 12, so my number of terms, if I go from 3 to 10, so that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If you count, that's 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8 numbers, not 7. You don't want to do 10 minus 3. It's 10 minus 3 plus 1. So the only time that it's going to be 10 numbers is if this starts with a 1. If it starts with anything else, you're going to have to subtract the top minus the bottom plus 1. So that is 8 numbers. My first term is 2 times 3 is 6. My last term, 2 times 10 is 20. And once you have all of that, my sum of 8 numbers is equal to n, f, l. So my number of terms is 8. My first term is 6. My last term is 20 over 2. So 4 times your 26 is going to give you 104 for your total. Okay. If I want to find the sum of the integers from 1 to 35, an integer is just your counting numbers. So that means 1, 2, 3, etc., all the way to 35. So on that one, my difference is 1. But if I want to find the sum, all I need to know, so my sum of 35 terms is my number of terms times my first term plus my last term over 2. So that ends up giving you 35 times 36 over 2, which ends up being 35 times 18, which ends up giving you 630. 14, I want to find the 50th partial sum of the arithmetic sequence. So the 50th partial sum, even though this goes to infinity, if I want to find a partial sum for it, or a sum of a certain number of terms, I call it a partial sum. So the first thing I need to do is I need to find the 50th term. So to do that, we're going to have to use our first equation to find our 50th term. So my 50th term is my first term plus 50 terms minus 1. And my difference, if I go up here, I'm adding 4 every time. So my difference is 4. So when I do that, I get negative 6 plus 49 times 4. And that's going to give me that my last term is 190. So this is my last term. So now, to find my sum of those 50 terms, that's 50 terms times your first term plus your last over 2. So that's going to end up giving me 4,600 for the total for all of this. Last problem. I want to find the seating capacity of an auditorium with 30 rows of seats. If there's 20 seats in the first row, 22 in the second, 24, and so on. So just like the last problem, if I want to find the sum of 30 seats, I need to find the last row. I need to find the 30th row. So we're going to have to do that first. So my 30th row is my first row plus my n minus 1 times my difference. So remember, it's a sub n equals a sub 1 plus n minus 1 times d. So 20 plus 29 times 2 ends up giving me 78. So my last row has 78. So now my sum of the first 30 rows is NFL. My number of rows is 30. My first term, we already know, is 20. My last is 78 over 2, and that gives you 1,470 seats.